Good morning. My name is Ruth Robarge, member of the congregation, and your moderator this morning. So howdy ho to everyone. Where the heck did Heidi Ho come from? Okay. Anyway, hello to everyone. I'm so glad to see you here. One of the great joys of moderating is getting to introduce and welcome our visitors. So first off, I do want to welcome and all of our people who thank you. I want to welcome all the people who are joining us online. So we are live streaming. The people who are running the lights back there also are doing that. Thank you. So we will have that also available online later if you want to re-listen to anything. That's just really useful. As far as the people that are here today, did anyone bring a friend or a visitor with them today? Would like to stand up and introduce them if they would like to? Or if you brought yourself and feel so inclined, you can stand up and introduce yourself. Any visitors? Hey, Ellie. Yeah, too bad. Welcome, daughters. Very, very, very welcomed. I don't see any other hands flailing, so unless you're going to, quote, out the person next to you, we'll move on. Okay, very good. This is a good time to kind of settle in, check in on social media if that is what you like to do, and silence your cell phones while you do that. So that you don't have to add anything of that type of noise to the service. You're welcome to add other sounds as you are so moved. And we're going to have a lovely service today, so I'm very glad to see all of you here. Thank you.
Again, good morning and welcome. This is the season of the blessing of the candles. Candlemas, they used to call it. 40 days after Christmas, before it gets warm out, when you are glad to have a fire going because it's still cold, to melt the wax or the tallow, to fill the molds and hang them by the wicks to harden in the February chill. A year's worth of candles to light the home after sunset, to read by, to sew by, to mend tools, to shine in the windows guiding friends, to make the room festive, maybe just to see beloved faces for an hour of conversation before crawling under the quilts to be ready for the next day's tasks. Piles of candles it must have been, with a handful of extras, all taken carefully to church that Sunday to be blessed, leaving a few behind there so that the church, too, and the school would have candles. Blessing the candles, blessing the light, blessing the planning ahead, the provision. Also, the blessing of Mary in the temple after the birth of Jesus, the final chord of the nativity celebration, the feast of the presentation. Or, if you like, the pagan celebration of Imbolc, the start of lambing season, the earliest stirrings of spring, the beginning of a new agricultural season, the celebration of milk, provision for new life, for the needful hunger of the young. As always, so many meanings, so many blessings. I like the image of bringing all the candles into community, all the light of the year to come in all the homes, hallowed together. There is something magical about the light of a living flame, after all, something uncanny, lovely, a little risky, holy. Did they remember back in the day, every time they lit another candle, that all of them were blessed? When the light was reflected in another's eyes, was it even more precious because of that trip to church to be pronounced sacred? Oh, come, let us bless the light of our days. Our brief, bright days so flooded with neon and halogen and LEDs. Bless the light that we share, that reveals us to one another. Bless the holy, tender light of love in each other's eyes. Bless the light of our work, of our truth, of our presence. Bless the light that we kindle, the light that we carry, the light that we are. This is the season for the blessing of the light in the midst of winter. Let us remember that there lives in each of us also an imperishable summer. And let us bless the light of this chalice flame, the living symbol of our faith, of our truth, of our commitment and our community, kindled to proclaim that we are together again once more.
Hello, my name is Tori, and I light this chalice for the acceptance of one another and encouragement to the spiritual growth in our congregations.
Thank you, Tori. Now I invite you to rise as you are willing and able to speak again the words of our community's covenant with one another, and then remain standing for our opening hymn, which celebrates the beginning of a new year in the spirit of Buddhism. Together we affirm, goodwill is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Inaccessible desire.
Now I invite you to be seated and turn and greet someone near you, if possible, someone you did not come in with, and ask if they have really? Hi. Now let's join our voices together in the antiphonal response that will appear on your screen to our seasonal reading. This is your response to each phrase after I say it, so let's try it together. We acknowledge our disappointment. We open our hearts to grace. For gifts that we yearned for, but did not receive. We acknowledge our disappointment. We open our hearts to grace. For the things we received but never wanted. We acknowledge our disappointment. We open our hearts to grace. For those who offered us cheerfulness when what we needed was comfort. We acknowledge our disappointment. We open our hearts to grace. For those who gave us gifts but never their presence, we acknowledge our disappointment. We open our hearts to grace. For those who offered us love when we could not accept it, we acknowledge our disappointment. We open our hearts to grace. For ourselves, when we could not give what was needed, we acknowledge our disappointment. We open our hearts to grace. For those we have loved deeply who left us too soon, we acknowledge our disappointment. We open our hearts to grace. For ghosts from memories of the past that haunt us to this day, we acknowledge our disappointment. We open our hearts to grace. For those who, like the innkeeper, turned us away, we acknowledge our disappointment. We open our hearts to grace. And for those we rejected, fearing we had no room in our homes or our hearts, we acknowledge our disappointment. We open our hearts to grace. For the times when we saw a star in the east, but failed to follow it, we acknowledge our disappointment. We open our hearts to grace. For the times when we followed it faithfully, but it did not lead where we hoped, we acknowledge our disappointment. We open our hearts to grace. For wise teachers and friends whose gifts we rejected, we acknowledge our disappointment. We open our hearts to grace. And for those we thought were wise and trusted to our detriment, we acknowledge our disappointment. We open our hearts to grace. For miracles gone unnoticed until it was too late, we acknowledge our disappointment. We open our hearts to grace. For salvation that has yet to arrive, we acknowledge our disappointment. We open our hearts to grace. For all these things, we pray to find an abiding serenity in all our memories, and that we may have peace now and in the days to come. In spite of all our disappointments, let us open our hearts again to grace, to forgiveness, and to love. And now our children are invited to depart for their classes with song.
My church, my friends, my beloved community, I am Joseph Davis. Good morning. I am not at work, even though I am in uniform, but I'm off today. But I did want to come in uniform because I know having a job that makes the city better and working for Midtown KC now like I do, I know the importance of what it means to have every component pulling together to make this city just a little bit better, whether it's what we do at Midtown KC now or something like the Memorial Park and Gardens, which is located at between 42nd and 43rd Forest Avenue. Now our offering today is for our Congregation Kol Ami that meets here. And the Rabbi Doug Alpert spoke last week, as I understand. This garden's amazing. They have chickens and ducks. They have a fish pond, as well as small individual plots where people can grow food as they choose, and larger gardens where neighbors can come and pick food. Kol Ami members mostly do the work tending it, though often volunteers do this as well. Because of this, Kol Ami members from all over the city interact with neighborhood residents. They have irrigation and gardening tools and supplies. The congregation sometimes holds services on the property. If you Google Kol Ami, you can find the page where they talk about the garden as part of their mission. All Souls members would be welcome to come and work with them or have individual plots. Now, Kendyl tells me in her email that for her the most important thing is the opportunity for all of us to connect more with nature in the middle of the city, whether or not gardening is our personal thing. It's helping to preserve the environment as well as a local and organic way of living, of which there is a lot going on in this city. Last week and this week, half of the offering goes to help support this project. It is partly used as a prophylactic against rising anti-Semitism in the larger culture. So with that in mind, the offering will be given and gratefully received.
Will you join me in the words of dedication for our offering? We dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and create change toward a just and compassionate society.
How to Stay Sane by Robin Chancer. In order to promote well-being, we can learn to practice mindful attention both to the present moment and to the good as we understand it. Faced with a frequently depressing, maddening world, this can mean focusing intently on the inspiring work going on around us in a multitude of spheres. Each time you feel hopelessness creep in, focus your attention on the kindness, generosity, and goodwill around you. We are witnessing an unprecedented blossoming of activism. If our eyes are tuned to the light, we will find the light. In the surge of donations to ACLU, in churches offering sanctuary to immigrants, in town hall meetings packed with civically engaged citizens, everywhere. Each time the tapes of despair and anger play in your mind, doggedly shift your focus. The mind will wander again and again. Each time it happens, we notice the anxious thoughts and shift our focus back. You may object, but I can't just forget all the terrible things going on. You are right. Mindfulness is not about forgetting. It is about shifting focus to what is most immediate and most helpful. We help no one by staying in our anguish for long. Both optimism and pessimism require future-oriented thinking. They exist in the hypothetical, the imaginary. Mindfulness involves shifting our attention repeatedly, resolutely, back to the present moment. We do not know the future. We cannot fully know the impact of any particular action. We must focus on what we can do right here and right now. Bring the mind back from its runaway worries and future predictions. Focus that energy on concrete action, and the rewards will feed your soul. We are traveling a long road toward change. At times, the pain will be so intense that these skills may not serve us fully. In those moments, allow yourself breaks. Care for yourself. If you find you are struggling to function normally, you may be experiencing more serious depression, anxiety, or trauma symptoms. Reaching out to a professional can help sometimes. When I need strength, I reread the note I received from the local Islamic society after I sent a message of friendship to them. Many thanks for your support, encouragement, and efforts done to assist our community during this difficult time. I remember the humility and kindness in the room where many people gathered to show solidarity with our Muslim neighbors. No one, not even the president, can take that away.
From Ringing the Temple Bell. What can the experience of listening to the bell at year's end do for us? It can, importantly, remind us to look at our life as we are actually living it. Did you know that each of us can tell what we were like in the past and what we will be like in the future by looking at our life today? We are everything we have ever seen, heard, smelled, tasted, touched, and thought. Furthermore, We will become everything we are now seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking. Each striking of the bell symbolically invites us to eradicate the 108 impurities, one by one, as the new year brings us to a fresh start. I would like to think that we could look deep into ourselves as the bell is struck and identify those behaviors which we can improve or extinguish. If we look at ourselves clearly, we realize that we are part and connected to this wonderment we call the universe. Our planet is small, but a small part of the universe, yet it is large to us who dwell upon it. Right mindfulness and understanding of our behavior will help make this planet healthier, calmer, and more protected from destruction.
A Buddhist tradition of ringing the big outside temple bell 108 times at year's end traditionally begins at midnight on the last day of the year and takes an hour. But modern temples sometimes offer the ritual earlier, or people can do it as a private practice at any time. The number 108 represents the 6 senses: sight, sound, touch, taste, smell, as well as unreflective thought or imagination. Each of these senses gives us experiences that are pleasurable, painful, or neutral. We may resist those sense experiences, or we may cling to them. This can happen in our memories of the past, in our immediate present experience, or in our fears or hopes for the future. Thus, there are 108 forms of attachment, or impurities of mind, that can distract us from the serenity of our true nature. With each sound of the bell, we are reminded to release these attachments so as to begin the year with a focused consciousness that is not in bondage to our sense experience or our desire for control. As our bells ring the 108 chimes this morning, you might consider the ways in which you may be captured by regrets for the past or fears for the future, and whether you are able to release those attachments and give your mind a fresh start. May these bells continue to resound in our spirits as the days unfold, always summoning us to release our attachments and find wholeness at the center of the present moment. It is so hard to get comfortable anymore. The middle-class American boomer consumer bubble has been burst, and it is not coming back. Just like the Western European Enlightenment Victorian colonialist bubble before it. We can't unknow what we know now. We can't unhear Dr. Christine Blasey Ford testifying about sexual assault as high school party entertainment. We can't unsee Michael Brown's body lying dead in the street. We can't unfeel the urgency of teenager Greta Thunberg's accusations about the destruction of the climate that she is going to have to live in after you and I are gone. It will require opioids to put us back to sleep now, and that way too lies destruction. What we know now is that the comfort we once thought we had, the comfort I grew up in and took for granted, was false. It was stolen. It was artificial. It wasn't earned like we thought, like we were told. It was built by the forced labor of slaves, maintained by the exploitation of nature and the planet, ensured by the suppression of any voices calling to rebalance the distribution of power. It's not that comfort in itself is a bad thing. It's the artificial comfort that is a problem. Comfort that is enjoyed at the cost of someone else having less or being less. That is a poisonous thing, an addiction, which destroys our spirits and our will and our ideals, just as surely as other addictions destroy our bodies and minds. Now, some people say in their analysis of our culture's dysfunction that those who are in the dominant positions are trying to protect our power and our privilege. I'm inclined to think it's actually our comfort that we are so reluctant to give up. My own intuitive, unreflective perception is that I don't actually have all that much power. And to the extent that I understand the privilege I enjoy, I feel I would happily give it up if I could to even the score for others. I would be overjoyed if every person on the planet could read. My literacy is a privilege, I understand, but it is not one I seek to defend. Let everyone read. Let everyone be protected and served by the police as I am. Let everyone get mortgages and loans from the bank. I have no desire to be special. But my comfort? Do not mess with my comfort. Do not make me sad or angry or guilty. Do not inconvenience me. Don't tell me I can't have plastic straws, or dry cleaning, or bug spray, or pineapples. Now, I get that when I become irritable about maintaining my comfort, I am by implication asserting my white, straight, cis, credentialed citizenship, privilege, and power. I don't think those things come apart. I'm just saying that I see the tension in my own life much more clearly when I consider how readily I rise to defend the choices and beliefs that make me comfortable than I do when I try to think about power or even privilege. It is comfort, more than anything, that the events of the past 2 weeks and the current administration in Washington have deprived me of. I am no longer able to rest in the pious hope that we are doing the best we can in dealing with the various crises that confront our nation and our world. I have to believe that we could do much, much better if those in office chose to. Moreover, I am to some extent being denied the comfort of assuming that most people agree with me, that I am a typical, reasonable, humane, right-thinking, ordinary sort of chap with values that more or less everybody shares. The world seems much more hospitable from that perception. It is stressful to think that my deepest convictions are outliers that place me on the far edge of the human bell curve. What it comes down to is that I am grieving the more or less center of the universe position that I used to take it for granted that I occupied. Rather like a former believer in an earth-centered system who finally gets that ours is just one of a number of planets in orbit around something else entirely, it's disorienting. It's a loss. I'm going to need a moment. The Buddhists are right, of course. Our suffering is a function of what we cling to. I don't totally buy that the solution is therefore not to get attached to anything, but there is a wisdom in this tradition that perhaps behooves us to pay attention to in times like these. The New Year meditation bells remind us of the ways in which we construct the sources of our own distress, of our discomfort, by desiring things we don't have and holding what we do have in distaste. Not just right now, but in the imaginary realms of the past and the future as well. We recall with regret and trauma things that happened in the past that were harmful and undesired. We grieve and yearn for desirable events that ended and beloved people that we have lost. It's the same with the future. We imagine with dread sufferings that might come and experience them as if they were happening. We also dream of delightful possibilities and then suffer from the awareness that they are not real and might never be. In fact, we waste a significant part of the here and now on a there and then that exists only in our minds. In his modern telling of the Christian nativity story, the poet W.H. Auden pictures the 3 wise men following the star in the east as personal representatives of classic intellectual thought problems. The second wise man wrestles with the philosophical riddle of time, saying this: "My faith that in time's constant flow lay real assurance broke down on this analysis. At any given instant, all solids dissolve, no wheels revolve, and facts have no endurance. And who knows whether it is by design or inadvertence that the present destroys its inherited self-importance. With envy, terror, rage, regret, we anticipate or remember, but never are. To discover how to be living now is the reason I follow this star. With envy, terror, rage, regret, we anticipate or remember, but never are. That's exactly it. How can we learn to be living now, in the present moment, which is where all real experience is necessarily located? I suspect that if I could get my ego out of the center of the universe of space and into the center of time's constant flow, I would have a more authentic and ethical life. I suspect if I were more committed to be present in the present, I might be less protective of my comfort. Comfort, which has a lot to do with trying to control what I anticipate and remember. This is how Robin Chancer advises us to stay sane in the crazy-making upheavals of today's world when she says, both optimism and pessimism require future-oriented thinking. They exist in the hypothetical, the imaginary. Mindfulness involves shifting our attention repeatedly, resolutely back to the present moment. We do not know the future. We cannot fully know the impact of any particular action. We must focus on what we can do right here and right now. Bring the mind back from its runaway worries and future predictions. Focus that energy on concrete action, and the rewards will feed your soul. Each time you feel hopelessness creep in, focus your attention on the kindness, generosity, and goodwill all around you. Each time the tapes of despair and anger play in your mind, doggedly shift your focus. The mind will wander again and again. Each time it happens, we notice the anxious thoughts and shift our focus back. You may object, but I can't just forget all the terrible things going on. You're right. Mindfulness is not about forgetting. It's about shifting focus to what is most immediate and most helpful. We help no one by staying in our anguish for long. We help no one by staying in our anguish for long. It is tempting to think that our feelings of outrage or disgust or grief or pity for those who are harmed are somehow useful to the world. But in truth, they are what keep us locked at the center of our own moral universe, in thrall to our recollections of the past and our dread of the future, helping no one. There is no avoiding these feelings. We must not numb ourselves or rush past them in a panic. We need to welcome their wisdom and then return our energy to the present. The columnist Nicholas Kristof makes the same point from the opposite direction in his end-of-the-year examination of long-term historical trends in the New York Times. Despite all the very valid reasons for concern about the future of humanity, if we widen the lens from the political and economic concerns of the richest, if not the greatest, nation on earth, to a global perspective, the following things are also true. Every single day in recent years, another 325,000 people got their first access to electricity. Each day, more than 200,000 got piped water for the first time. And some 650,000 went online for the first time every single day. Perhaps the greatest calamity for anyone is to lose a child. That used to be common. Historically, almost half of all humans died in childhood. As recently as 1950, 27% of all children still died by the age of 15. Now that figure has dropped to about 4%. Diseases like polio, leprosy, river blindness, and elephantiasis are also on the decline. As recently as 1981, 42% of the planet's population endured extreme poverty, defined by the United Nations as living on less than about $2 a day. In figures corrected for inflation, that portion has plunged to less than 10% of the world's population today. Half a century ago, a majority of the world's people had always been illiterate. We are now approaching 90% adult literacy. And there have been particularly large gains in girls' education, and few forces change the world so much as the education and empowerment of women. In this regard, it is worth noting that women in Bangladesh, for example, now average just 2.1 births in their lifetimes, down from 6.9 in 1973. Christoph does not offer any of this information in the service of complacency. If anything, the awareness of what has been accomplished in such a relatively short time ought to energize humanity to tackle the next achievable goals. He quotes Oxford University economist Max Roser, who writes, "Three things are true at the same time. The world is much better. The world is awful. The world can be much better yet." This is the time we live in, friends. Dickens was right. The best of times, the worst of times. The one thing it's not is comfortable. We can afford neither complacency nor despair. We cannot afford to be captured by our grief for the artificial comforts of an era that must be relegated to the artifacts of history. Neither can we afford to assume that there is progress onward and upward forever. That was part of the artificial comfort we are now called to renounce in the service of making a real difference in the present. The way to stay sane is to carry the sound of those bells, forever calling us back from the impotent past and the illusory future, to bring our minds and hearts and strength to this moment where all our capacity lies. Three truths at the same time. Things are awful. Very well, what can be done? And keep in mind that things are not awful because you and I are uncomfortable. The things that are awful are mostly the things that have always been the scourges of humankind: illness, hunger, ignorance, violence, the death of children. What can we do to reduce this awfulness? Three truths. Things are less awful than they have been. Remember the admonition of Adrienne Marie Brown. Things are not getting worse, they are getting uncovered. We must hold each other tight and continue to pull back the veil. Very well. How do we hold each other here and now? How do we continue to pull back the veil and bring the light of truth that once known makes us all free to live better lives? Three truths. Things could be so much better than they are. Very well, let's be about it. Whatever on the list of awfulness calls your name, grief will come. Grief for the comforting illusions swept away, followed by grief for the suffering that so many people must face. But do not dwell in your grief any longer than you must. It serves no one. Rage will come and disgust for the cruelty and greed of some that make the suffering of others worse than it might otherwise be. But do not dwell in your rage and disgust. In itself, it serves no one. Dread will come of all the evils that the future might well hold. Learn from your fears, but do not dwell there either, nor in idle dreams of the future's lottery. Rather, abide here and now in mindfulness with the people you can hold close, with the work that is at hand and needs to be done. Memory and hope can inform that work, but they are no substitute for it. And it is in that work that authentic comfort, the enduring kind that we can trust, will come. Let the bells call you back to the present, to the possible, to the truth that makes us free, to the time we have together, to the song we share. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fires of commitment. For all these, we carry in our minds and hearts until we are together again. The poet Walt Whitman asks, "Will you still seek afar off? You surely come back at last. In things best known to you, finding the best, or as good as the best, happiness, knowledge, not in another place, but this place, not for another hour, but this hour. So be it."